Welcome everyone to my continued review of satanic cults. There's another book by William Sins Bainbridge, Revival, the Reconstructing of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. He originally wrote a book on the Process Church called Satan's Power back in the 70s. Now, this is a very difficult book to obtain. I'm looking forward to kind of complete my research, which is important. We really need to get down to understand satanic cults in general and the Process Church specifically, who's made one amazing impression for an organization that basically didn't do much for a long period of time and basically was a struggling organization who turned into this massive animal protection agency. It's kind of a weird story. And I still haven't figured out what is at the bottom of it all. What is the truth of it? Because you can't find truth anywhere. You have to use your Gnostic abilities, your higher self, and of course you had to train yourself to get to that level to figure out if anybody is telling you the information that has value, because everybody is giving you disinformation, bad information, either deliberately or because they're just kind of idiots. So this is an interesting book. I think people will like this book because it's written kind of in a murder mystery way. So that people read this as a novel. Now, I personally don't like this. One of the Process children from the 80s wrote a book like this, Jared Garrett, who wrote a novelized version of A Kid in a Cult, which is just masking what he's doing. Now, there's a couple of reasons why you do this. Jared is a writer in general, so he likes to write stories, and he writes fictional stories, and so it was easy for him. But it also covers things up, and you don't use people's names, and you avoid, of course, any possible lawsuit because it is only fiction. Well, I don't really like that because of that reason, and I don't particularly like to read stories. I like to read people's statements instead of a story of what's going on. But they do go into rituals here in this book. It shows you what their belief system is, the people involved to a degree. I'm assuming most of the names have been changed. So it does go through the entire Process Church if you're interested, kind of from the inside out. If you went there and you knew these people, this is what you would experience. And I think that's an interesting way of looking at it, even though personally I don't find that very interesting when you novelize something. I prefer to have facts, but because in novelizations, things can kind of get a little distorted because you're putting together a logical story. When you're stating facts, you're just stating facts. You don't have to necessarily connect them to a story. So this is a very interesting book. It is written by an outsider. It's written by a person who knew about the Process Church. Now, whether he got the correct information or not, we don't know. You can listen to my other reviews on books about my conclusions as of this time, as it appears. We don't know the full story here because it's untold yet. And basically, the major people in the church are all dead or dying. I mean, you got to remember, this was 30, 40 years ago. So all these people are in their 70s and 80s. The original founder of the Process Church, Robert Moore, otherwise known as Robert de Grimston, is 86 or something now. He'll be dying soon, and we won't know anything. And he hasn't written anything at all, so he's dropped out of it. They have been tied in by some fairly ignorant writers into being this international cult of murderers, which doesn't hold up whatsoever. Doesn't hold up whatsoever. Nobody in the Process Church, the leadership, has been arrested. Very few of the members, if any of them, have been arrested. Now you could say this is a big cover-up, but this is 30, 40 years ago. We don't know what's happening with that massive animal welfare organization they're running that are taking in tens of millions of dollars. It's a massive organization with a huge amount of support. How did all that happen? That's the big question. This does state, this book, like several other ones, states that there are secret houses, secret groups that were not known of within the Process Church. The leaders lived in locations that were semi-secret. This kind of stuff makes you wonder a little bit. And this is where that 5 to 10% of wonder comes in there. There seems to have been a lot of different houses that house different groups within the Process Church. The main group, which was running coffee shops, writing books, doing the magazines, and they didn't have a lot of money. They had a lot of trouble a lot of times. Then on the other hand, and it's confusing, the people that are running the church, particularly Marianne and Robert, were living in luxury in big mansions. Well, where'd all that money come from? And of course, that's very typical of cults. They have people going on the streets and begging every day. They barely have enough food to eat. And the leaders of them are living in the lap of luxury. And this goes with so many of them. We heard this with David Koresh, where he was living in air conditioning, eating fast foods, and he was screwing everybody and nobody else had anything. So this is the kind of thing you run into time and time again. There's been many allegations against the Hare Krishnas of child abuse, murder, and all the things they do by going out and begging all the time. That's how they raise money. Well, it's hard to run a high-level assassination group if you're begging all the time, or maybe not. That's your fundraising. Where your money comes from doesn't matter as long as you get it. So the bottom line is the Process Church ran their philosophy into the ground. They couldn't really generate any more money. And what they were doing for a long time was using animal sanctuary to raise funds, which they said was from themselves, was for the animal sanctuary, but I think was going for the support of the church. So this book goes into that. It gives you this whole story. I really didn't find anything new here. I did find one thing that I found interesting is that which makes sense, the name Lucifer in Latin means left, the left-hand path. Lucifer sat on the left hand of God, and of course this is where all of the left-handed negative demonic descriptions come from. But I didn't know that Lucifer in Latin meant left, or one of the many things. You got to remember, a European word could mean 6 or 8 things, and you insert that per the meaning for that particular sentence. So when you look at all that, it's very fascinating. So if you're looking to learn about it and you want more of a story instead of just reading a history, as Timothy's book basically is a history, and then there's many, many different chapters there. The Secret History, or whatever it is of that, with Timothy Wiley, I think it is. Timothy Wiley. That's more of a that is a nonfiction book and has a lot of different chapters written by a whole bunch of different members in the church. So it's a very good book. This one's interesting, as I said, if you want to read this to have a novelized version of it. And this is supposed to be starting the church again in modern times, which does give it an interesting little switch. So they talk about the old church and the founders, and they're talking about stuff that is happening right now and recently. So it does update it and makes it a little more interesting if that's what you're into. But in terms of any research here, anything coming out that it was not known, this is kind of reaffirming what we've already known, and reaffirming that, there were a bunch of secret lodges, secret process houses where people were in. Well, who was in these? What members were they? What were they up to? And of course, it just reaffirms the exploitative nature of all these cults. I mean, Scientology does this. The Christians do it. All these cults do the same thing, where they basically make people into slaves. And I don't know why anybody would stay around. And give all that they make over to the bigger church head, and they throw you back scraps. I just don't quite understand how that works with anyone, why people don't get tired of it faster. While the people at the top are really living in the lap of luxury. They have every possible thing they could want, and the other people are worrying about whether they can eat every day. There was discussion in Timothy's book of how the children there, one woman who had a baby was given money by her mother so she could buy formula for her baby, and she was working in the church. What insanity is this? If that is true, we just don't know for 100%, but it fits into the actual mold of these cults that abuse people. And unfortunately, abuse works. When people have nothing and you force them to do things and create a slave-master mentality, it works. The more you give someone, the more they abuse you. And I went with my organization where I gave people virtually everything, and they were the biggest, rottenest traitors you could ever think of. So, there is this same old story. And the Process Church, again, didn't have a very strange belief system. It's pure Gnostic belief system where this is an evil physical reality ran by Satan, and that this is how the world is. Now, the fact of uniting the higher and lower self, which is basically the Gnostic principle and what the church taught kind of as a core, using some bad terminology and trying to give too much credit to Lucifer and Satan really turned people off ultimately. And then they stepped back from that and they dropped all that stuff. They dropped Satan and Lucifer in their later years because nobody was buying into that. They just hear that and people run. But uniting your higher and lower self, your right and left brain, so there's not conflict between the good and evil, is something that's been taught for many, many years now, and basically goes back thousands of years. So there's nothing strange here. There's nothing odd in their philosophy. Now, if you're going to run around with these robes, but they changed all that stuff. Initially, they did that, and they made a big impact. A lot of people noticed them, and they generated a lot of interest. People went to their coffee shop and bought their magazines, but because they were so strange, nobody really joined. But they had enough joining and enough wealthy people, apparently, particularly the Brits, where they were able to collect quite a bit of large sums of money and property, and this apparently carried them right up to the last day. So this is all part of what is going on in general. So if you like that, that's what this book is about. I don't think there's too many other books on the Process Church that have been written directly. So here's something that you definitely, if you want to get information, is kind of a fun read if you like novelizations. Until next time.